approval ratings, if I can put it bluntly, nationally, they're sitting in the toilet, right? And this is a midterm election year. But the pageantry, the standing in awe as that symbol of American presidential power, not just the man or hopefully the woman one day, but that symbol of presidential power and the free world, I should say, over my shoulder, landed on the tarmac here in minutes. In minutes from now, we'll just take off again on that same runway, 28 left. That's going to get $3.7 million to keep it functioning in the event of a major earthquake. That is awe-inspiring to see the pageantry, to see the president. That speech he gave here, by the way, Ashley and Brittany, felt somewhat like a little bit of a stump speech with some promises mixed in, a little bit of a campaign rally on the trail with all of our senators and local Congress people, some retiring, by the way, but some who have an election, like Senator Wyden later this year, and all of our Congress folks who also will be elected or will have their re-election later this year in November. And we're just a few weeks out from the primaries. So you got to temper all of this with the fact that that's what's happening behind the scenes. Yes, it is a rare visit. We haven't seen a presidential visit, certainly a President Biden here since he was elected. And then you go back to thinking President Obama, who made stops at Intel and Nike, and you go back to the days of the first George H.W. Bush, and how he and Dan Quayle were greeted by protesters during every visit. We haven't seen that here. We have seen stories about some students, for example, who are against the widening of I-5 in the Rose Quarter, making an appearance, wanting to make their voices heard, wanting to make sure that infrastructure projects like the I-5 bridge, the interstate bridge, which I don't think the president mentioned in his speech, that should that be widened, that's something that be done when it comes to climate as well. So got to keep all of that in context here, guys.
Yeah, there are a lot of layers when it comes to the president's speech today. And thank you, David, for your report. We do want to talk a little bit more about what's happening as we're seeing the president enter Air Force One right now.
Yeah, let's get out to our Mike Benner, who is on the tarmac. Mike, give us a rundown of what you're seeing.
Hey there. Well, the motorcade just pulled up. It looked like it came off Marine Drive, a gate on the north side of the airport. What was very interesting, Ashley and Brittany, is that the president got out of the limousine right at the base of the stairs and walked right on to Air Force One and did not turn, did not wave, which is something you typically see from a president as they are departing an airport. So it was a quick situation. He pulled up and he jumped out and right onto Air Force One. And from here, the president will be heading to Seattle, where, among other things, he'll be talking about reducing the cost of prescription drugs. After speaking with one of the deputy press secretaries at the White House yesterday, you know, this is very special that President Biden came to Oregon is really going anywhere at all. They said through COVID he did not travel much because of what's going on in Ukraine. He hasn't traveled much, but over the course of the last couple of weeks, he's been in Iowa, North Carolina, New Hampshire. Today he is in Oregon, and he'll be in Seattle tonight, and of course spend some time there tomorrow. But again, the motorcade just pulling up, wrapping up what is a 4-hour stop here in Portland. Most of today all about touting that infrastructure bill, or excuse me, law rather.
Okay, Mike, thank you. And taking a look at this shot here, again, President Biden just boarded Air Force One about 1 minute ago. We are anticipating that the jet will take off here momentarily from Portland. As Mike said, President Biden is then going to fly up to Seattle, where he will stay the night tonight. He will give a speech tomorrow on Friday, which happens to be Earth Day. That'll coincide with a talk that the president will give on climate change, some climate initiatives he is pushing forward. He will also be discussing trying to cap prices on prescription drugs, which has been one of the president's campaign promises. Just to recap, if you're just tuning into our coverage and seeing this picture here live this afternoon at PDX of Air Force One, President Biden has been here roughly about 4 hours today on this Thursday, his anticipated first trip to the region as president. Today, the president landed around 12:45 at PDX. He stayed at the airport there, where he gave a speech at the airport. First, we heard from Portland Mayor Ted Wheeler. He talked about some of these infrastructure initiatives and issues facing the city, as well as the I-5 replacement project. We heard from Oregon Governor Kate Brown, and then from Oregon's congressional delegation. We heard from all of our Democratic representatives and our 2 senators who were there. Again, the Air Force One just loading up. You can see the door closing, and we want to send it out now to our David Molko.
Yeah, David, it looks like we're getting closer and closer to seeing that Air Force One takeoff. What can you tell us?
Yeah, and as this happens, it's going to happen relatively quickly because nobody really waits for the president, right? He is first and foremost the commander-in-chief, and here we are in Portland Air National Guard Base, which is adjacent to PDX. About 1,500 service members here, men and women here on the National Guard Base, watching this unfold with us. I can tell you, it's an impressive sight. Again, no matter what you think about the politics here, to see that aircraft, that's the military model of EC-25 of the Boeing 747, actually scheduled to be replaced because that aircraft, like a lot of other things in the infrastructure in this country, in Portland, is actually aging. So that's something that's in the works. What we expect to see is hit taxi, sort of turn taxi to the southeast, I guess the direction would be, because that's the way the wind is blowing. It's coming out of the northwest. The same runway he came in on, that's the one that's going to get that $3.75 million to keep it functioning if we have an earthquake. So let's just put it this way. If we didn't have that money and we had an earthquake, Air Force One wouldn't be coming to Portland. The president wouldn't be coming to Portland. He will take off presumably to the northwest, bank to the right, again, commercial traffic usually held during this process, and then fly at, probably a relatively low altitude. If we're talking Seattle-Tacoma International Airport on a commercial flight, that takes maybe 20 minutes, but that's when you're, up, you're waiting for air traffic, you got to descend through and sort of wait for clearance to get in sequence. Air Force One does not sequence, so he'll be up in the sky, make that bank, and my money's on maybe a 10 or 12-minute flight until he's on the ground in Washington, guys.
So, David, you've covered several presidential visits to different areas of the country. What stood out to you about this one as the president made his speech and his way through the city of Portland?
It's interesting. I started, as an intern with NBC News, and I remember covering George W. Bush. He was welcoming the president of Poland on the White House lawn. And then 2010, I was working for CNN in the Rose Garden at the White House with then President Obama and Secretary of State Hillary Clinton at the time, announcing they were going to restart direct talks between the Israelis and the Palestinians with Egypt and Jordan and others. And no matter what, when you see the president for a moment or every day or once in a lifetime, it's still the symbol of that power and of the office and what it stands for. What really stood out to me is, one, the shortness of the visit, but let's face it, he's making a lot of these pit stops around the country, right? Mike mentioned this. We're talking about New Hampshire. He's going up to Washington. He's sort of covering his bases and meeting with our local elected officials, our state officials. But what stood out was really the mixed bag nature of that speech, right? There were no big announcements. It was sort of, here's a little bit of, what I've been talking about with this bill, a lot of what we knew about, but it was a lot of, and here's what I'm going to try and do about an inflation. And by the way, did you forget, I'm releasing 100 million barrels of oil a day from our strategic reserve, because the president knows this. He's up against these really, really strong disapproval ratings. His approval numbers in the high 30s or 40% nationally. Those are the approval ratings. Those in favor of the president, the job the president is doing. Excuse me. When you talk about just the economy, how he's handling the economy, the CNBC poll puts those approval ratings even lower at 35% based on what we're seeing with inflation and gas prices. And I guess now Air Force One is on the move.
Yeah, taking a look at the Air Force One now starting to take off. We want to send it back to Mike Benner, who is near the tarmac for us. Mike, just tell us a little bit about what you're seeing as you see the plane ready to leave.
Yeah, hey there, Brittany. The Air Force One pulling away right now, and we're just getting a gust of wind in our direction from those engines. Wow. Pleasant smell as well. But yeah, he pulled up here, the president, just a few moments ago, really less than 5. He jumped out of his limousine. He went straight onto the plane without turning and waving at the cameras. The traveling press corps, entered the Air Force One from the back of the plane, and here we are just a few minutes later, and it is now taxiing toward the runway and for departure to Seattle. I second what David said. Just anytime you see Air Force One, it's just an incredible sight, and something I think our viewers are getting appreciation for, and that's regardless of what side of the aisle that you are on as far as politics.
Yeah, it's just a remarkable sight, Mike. You're so right. Whether you love or hate the president, you have to respect the office. You have to respect the president and this magnificent piece of technology, this ingenuity. Air Force One is just incredible, an enormous piece of equipment here. Let's recap here as we watch this site. We want to give our viewers a moment to take all of this in because it is very rare to obviously have a president visit Portland and be able to take in this site. So yeah, the president spent about 4 hours today here talking about his infrastructure bill. He is now en route to Seattle, up to the Emerald City, where he will, we can speculate he will give much of the same conversation, the same speech to constituents and voters up in Seattle, but he'll also be talking about his efforts to lower prescription drugs, as well as some climate initiatives on Earth Day tomorrow. His stop at the Portland Yacht Club earlier this afternoon must have been just under an hour, his visit there, Brittany, and tickets to that event, this private fundraising event this afternoon in Portland, were between $500 and $36,000. So a fundraising event for the Democratic Party. And you had to imagine much of our congressional delegation, as well as Portland elected leaders and Oregon elected leaders, were there.
Yeah, and that can also be reflected in a lot of the speech that was happening today. It did feel very much like a stump for campaign season. And as David and we have mentioned throughout the newscast, of course, we've got that May primary coming up right here for our gubernatorial election in May. So let's toss it back to David Molko, who's out there live for us to give us a little context on this. David.
And it's not just the state elections here and the local elections that might matter, Brittany and Ashley Beer, but if we widen out and look at the entire country and the balance of power, I mean, this is a midterm election year. It's a big deal for the president. I'm hearing those thrusters rev up over my shoulder here if you're watching this picture. Going to kind of cheat a little bit and turn around here as we look at the picture of Air Force One making its way. This is 28 left. That's that longest runway, the one that's getting the $3.75 million. As Air Force One makes its way, firing its way down the runway, waiting till they reach V1. That's that takeoff rotation moment, that speed of that point of no return with that huge aircraft. And here it is as it rotates. Wheels leaving the tarmac, I think there, and off it goes. The president departing Oregon after just about 4 hours there, guys.
David, thank you so much, live from PDX for us. And in case you're wondering, I'm sure a lot of our viewers are wondering, what is the impact to me this afternoon, the traffic impact? Because no major freeways or highways were shut down. Typically if you have a dignitary visiting, they may shut down freeways altogether. There could be a massive police presence conducting traffic. Today, that was not so much the case, as the president landed at PDX and then only drove a couple miles in his motorcade to the Portland Yacht Club on Northeast Marine Drive. So it was all fairly contained as far as that goes, no major road closures. So if you are heading out in that area this afternoon, obviously you may see some traffic impact just in that Northeast Portland area, but broadly there should not be many traffic impacts across the region. One note though, if you are flying out of PDX, the Port of Portland officials earlier today had said just expect some possible delays to your flights because of all of the kind of the chaos here and all of the presidential, the team with him at the airport. But overall, it should be pretty minimal. Just love to stay with that site as we get that last second, those last few moments of Air Force One taking off into the sky in the Portland airspace.
Yeah, it really is quite an amazing sight to see that just historic part of our country right there, that historic part of aviation kind of mixing in with the clouds. And we do want to remind you that we will continue our coverage, giving some real context on the president's visit today. And that includes reaction from local Republicans here, as well as some context around that infrastructure law that the president touted so much today. And we will have more for you, of course, on air and online at KGW.com.